Hello there. I'm Bill Forshey, and I've been writing for a long, long time. Not very well, maybe, but I'm still here. And I'm going to tell you a little story out of the past books of mine, one of which is called Tennessee Boy, because that's where I was born, in Cleveland, Tennessee, back in 1931. And what I'm going to tell you about is a habit they had in those days of sending convicts to work on the railroads for the TVA. And that's why this story is called Waterboy. And it's about a kid who has that job.
Tennessee in those days hired out the convicts and sent them out to work along the railroads. And they cleaned the railroads and worked along the side of them. And every morning by our house, which was up at the top of the hill, the convicts would be brought up in a big old truck. And they'd get out and they'd grab all their tools. And the man that brought the lunch cans, they had round cans about so big that stacked up one on top of the other, he'd bring those out and he'd load them on his back. And they'd come down past our house. We lived in a big white house, frame house up on the side of the hill, Granddaddy's. And he'd stop outside the gate and he'd yell, "Hey, anybody in there going to work today?" And I'd yell, "Yes, sir," because I was 10 years old and the Depression was on. And I knew I was going to earn myself 10 cents or a quarter. And he'd say, "Bring your tools then, Sonny, and come on." They called me Sonny in those days because I had long yellow hair. And the convicts called me Little Sunshine. And that's why they called me Sonny, because I had this yellow hair. And they thought I was a little bit of a bright guy to be around. And I'd come running with my tools and my lunch, because Aunt Ella would pack me 4 or 5 big biscuits with some onion in them and some fat back. And we'd come along and go down the track, cross the trestle, and over toward the Ocoee Dam. Now that's one of those TVA dams that they have down there. And I'd go down there, and the first part of the day wasn't hard at all, because, you know, men were fresh and they weren't tired yet. They'd be walking along in these big overalls, big P written on the back of them. And they'd start working along the railroad track, clearing brush and tamping the ties and doing different kinds of things. And I'd go on down to the creek, the Ocoee River. Now, I'm not saying it was shallow, but Granddaddy said a man would have a tough time finding a place to drown in. And I'd go down there and make toad houses. Y'all know what toad houses are?
No.
Well, a toad house, you take the sand and you pack it up over your foot. And when you get it all packed around your foot, you pull your foot out, and there's a toad house. and the big toe makes a bedroom, and then the little toads can sleep in the little room. And so I go down there and I'd do that, and I'd practice my rock skipping. But along about 10 o'clock, one of them convicts would open up his mouth and yell, "Waterboy!" And I'd come hauling it up from that river with a whole bucket full of water in a dipper. Now the gang boss was in charge of the 3 guards and the 20 to 25 convicts they had there. And I would carry the bucket of water over to the man that yelled "Waterboy." But I wouldn't give him nothing. I'd wait and I'd hold that dipper. And he would look at the gang boss with his tool up, and the gang boss would nod his head. When he nodded his head, then I'd let that man have the dipper. And they always thanked me. They were polite. They'd say, "Thank you, Sonny." And I'd go down the line giving each man water as they wanted. And then I'd go back down and wait at the river for somebody else to yell "Waterboy." Come lunchtime, they'd get all those cans out and they'd sit there and they would be eating beans that had been cooked with some meat in them. But if you stayed in the jail and you didn't go to the work, you didn't get no meat. You just got the beans. So the fellas that worked out got more food that way. And the summer went along like that pretty good until along about the middle of July when the days started to get hotter. Now, when it gets hot in Tennessee, it gets hot in the afternoons because those mountains keep everything shady in the valleys in the morning. But in the afternoon, it gets hot, and I do mean hot. And more they'd holler at me, and I'd go running up and down from that river bank, getting fresh water and running up and down every time and taking that water back and forth. Long about 4 o'clock, though, the boss would look at his watch and he'd say, "Well, I swear to my soul, I reckon it must be quitting time." And then he'd say like to himself, "Oh, no, it can't be quitting time already." And then one of them young colored bucks would yell out, "Oh, yes, sir, boss, it must be quitting time. No fine gang boss like you gonna have no watch that tells the wrong time." And sure enough, he'd say, "Well, all right, boys, pack it up." And they'd all grab their tools and line up and start marching back across the trestle. And I'd trail along behind carrying my bucket and my dipper. And I'd follow them back up the hill. And we'd go over the trestle. And we got to the house. The gang boss had stopped. And he'd say, well, Sonny, did you work hard today? And I'd say, yes, sir, I sure did. And he'd say, did you carry a lot of water? I'd say, 20 or 30 buckets, which was a lie. And he'd say, well, do you reckon you earned a quarter or a dime? And I'd say, whatever you think is right, sir. And he'd flip me a coin. And that was sort of a game all summer, because sometimes it was a quarter, and sometimes it was a dime. But at the end of July, they brought out a new prisoner, and his name was Bass. And he was a big black man. He stood well over 6'2", and he weighed about 240 pounds, and he had muscles that looked like they were made of iron. When he worked, he'd take his shirt and drop it down around his waist and tie it. And take those straps from his overalls down and tie that all together around his waist. And when he was swinging the axe or doing any kind of work, it was amazing to watch him because he was so strong and fast and quick. Where a tree would take 3 or 4 strokes from another man, it only took him 2 strokes and the tree would go down. These were little trees, these weren't big trees, but they'd be growing by the track and getting in the way of the train when the train went by. So he'd do this kind of work. But he was a troublemaker. The guards told me this first. The guard that I used to trade my comic books to particularly told me that he was always causing trouble. He'd say, that Bass is a troublemaking son of a bitch. Because Bass believed that those men deserved a little bit of cash every day for going out and working that hard in that hot sun so that they could afford to buy their tobacco and everything. Well, I didn't have nothing to say about that because that was none of my business. But then one day, Bass didn't come to work, and I asked one of the other convicts when I was giving him the water, I whispered to him to find out what was going on. And he said, well, Bass is in the hole because he made too much noise about the convicts getting anything. But he was out of the hole a week later, and I saw he looked pretty beat up. And he said some of the guards had had a party with him. I didn't know what that meant then. I think I do now. But Bass kept right on working and kept right on complaining that the men should be paid. And the summer went along. Now, the only real excitement that happened during the summer while the weather got that hot was that every once in a while the men would spot a rattlesnake. And the first guy that saw it would yell, snake! And all of the men would run over and make a big circle around where the rattler was, and they'd start stomping their feet. So the snake would stay in one place. And the man that hollered snake got the first chance at it. And he'd go creeping up on that snake slow, and he'd take one hand around like this, and he'd move it in a real slow circle so that when you got looking at that snake, you could see the snake all coiled up and waiting to get him. Now, I'll admit, our Tennessee rattlers ain't nothing, not a patch on what y'all got out here in California. But if you leave them alone, they grow pretty big. And we get some 3 and 4 footers down there, and once in a while a really big one. But this man would get closer and closer to that snake, and he would talk to him all the time. Ooh, snake, here comes your daddy. I'm going to take you home, snake. You're going to be my snake tonight, snake. You're going to sleep in a new place just where I take you. Here I come, snake. I'm going to get you, snake. And his other hand would be up there like a bird just about to drop down. And just when that snake was so nervous and ready to jump, whoop, the other hand would come down and grab him around the neck. And he'd stand up with 4-footer rattler wrapped around his arm. And the men would all cheer and laugh and say, "Whoo, boy, you're going to have enough tobacco to last for a month." Because he got 25 cents a foot at the Herpetarium in Cleveland, Tennessee, which is where they had to go back past when they were going back to the jail. Bass kept on causing trouble, though. And one day he came to work, and I found out the sheriff had him beat. And he came to work, and he was walking down the track ahead of us, and I could see as he walked the blood seeping out of the cuts, and he had so much blood that that pea on his back was almost wiped out by the blood. And that day I started to talk to him, and the guard said, "Get away from him, boy, that man's dangerous. He's liable to grab you and use you for a shield and try to escape." Well, I didn't believe that because Bass liked me. And he was as polite as any of them to me. He never treated me bad or nothing. Never cussed either. But that day, I could see that it wasn't just the beating. He was mad clean through. But he was determined, and I couldn't tell what he was determined about. But I heard him say to one of the others, a man would be better off dead than to be treated like this. And that afternoon, one of the men hollered, "Snake!" And all of a sudden Bass said, "I'll take it." And the men made their circle, and they were stomping, and there was Bass, big and strong, and looking down, and this must have been the granddaddy of all the snakes in Tennessee. I swear it must have been 6 feet. It was longer than me by a long ways. And I got in the circle too and watched and stamped my feet because I learned how to do it. And Bass got closer and closer to that snake, and his hand was going around and around like this, and his other hand, and he was saying, "Ooh, I'm going to take you home, snake. You're going to be my snake tonight. And if you try to bite me, you're liable to be fried snake tonight." And the men was saying, "Careful, boy, don't let him bite or there'll be a sad mama tonight." And I was getting closer and watching, and Bass was getting closer and closer to that snake, and just as the snake was almost ready, Bass suddenly turned his hand down like that, and the snake caught him right there. And Bass grabbed him a little below the neck, and the snake let go there and bit him again there, and then bit him again there. And then Bass slid his hand up and said, "Here's your snake. You can keep the money," to the man that had spotted the snake in the first place. And the gang boss looked at Bass and said, "I ain't going to take you back to no damn hospital. You did that on purpose." And Bass said, "A man ought to die rather than be beholden to people like you." And the gang boss said, "What the rest you looking at? Get back to work." He says, "You go sit under that tree and don't you move." Bass went over and sat down under the tree. And he didn't move. After a while, the gang boss said, "Sonny, y'all take him some water if you want to." And I went over and I looked at him. And he drank some water. I said, "Does it hurt?" He said, "Not as much as being here does." The boss said, "Get away from him now. You gave him some water, that's all he needs." The men were working. They didn't talk at all. They didn't call for water. They worked sullen and quiet. And Bass sat under the tree. After a while, the gang boss went over to him and talked to him a while. And then I saw him pull a little bottle of moonshine out of his pocket and give it to Bass. Bass took a few drinks of that. The boss came back. Another couple of hours passed and the men were working. The boss looked at his watch and said, "I swear it must be time people go home." Nobody answered him. He said it again louder. "I said it must be time to quit and go home." Nobody said a word. And then one of the guards said, "Yes, boss, that's right." And he took that as enough. And they all got up and started to get themselves ready to go home. And he walked under the tree there and looked at Bass and felt his pulse. And Bass wasn't moving at all. They took him. They wrapped him up in some tarpaulin they had with them. The men shouldered their tools, and they started up the trail with Bass's body swinging back and forth between them up the railroad track and across the trestle. And I followed along behind with my bucket and my tipper. And the gang boss standing beside me looking grim. And we got to the house. And I thought, don't let him play that game on me tonight. Don't let him play that game on me. But he turned to me and he said, "Well, Sonny, how much y'all figure you earned today?" And I said, "A quarter. I earned a quarter." He said, "Don't you get smart with me, young man." And I said, "I earned a quarter." And he said, "You'll take what you get and be thankful." And he flipped a coin at me and I saw it was a dime, and I turned on my heel and I marched to the house. And I opened the screen door and walked inside. And then I turned and yelled back, "And I ain't working for you no more neither." And the convicts cheered. And they marched on away and got in the truck and rode off. And the next day, they stopped at the Underwood's house, and the little Underwood boy went out. Because a dime or a quarter for a kid in those days was a lot of money. But I sometimes think that I learned more from Bass and that snake about what it was about being a man in Tennessee than I ever did from the gang boss. And I somehow learned that it ain't the money in any job that makes it worth doing. And I may be a long way from Tennessee, but that part of the Tennessee boy is still a part of me.